Okay, so imagine this. You're logged in, like a philosophical debate, right?
Right.
With someone about, some tricky ethical thing. And of course, you've got your reasons, they've got theirs. But what if there was a way, I don't know, a deeper level to go to, a way to actually sort out which moral principles are, like the ones that really hold up, not just because you think so, but because they could be justified, like to anyone.
That's a great way to frame it, yeah. Because that search for a kind of foundational bedrock, that's exactly what leads us to this idea called contractualism. It's a really fascinating approach in moral philosophy. And for this deep dive, we're going to be looking closely at how the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy lays it all out.
Okay, so we're not messing around here. This isn't just about like gut feelings about right and wrong. We're talking about a whole system for thinking through those disagreements,
Mhm.
like a shortcut maybe to get to the core of our ethical beliefs. So it's not just opinions, but stuff we could actually explain and justify to each other.
Exactly. And when we zero in on contractualism specifically, I mean, in this really precise sense, we're mainly following the work of T.M. Scanlon. His book, What We Owe to Each Other, it's like the book on this, and he puts it so well. The basic idea is an action is wrong if it's the kind of thing that would be banned by any set of rules, rules for like everyone, rules that nobody could reasonably say no to if they were being fair and thinking clearly.
Whoa, okay, that's a mouthful. Definitely need to unpack that one. So what's our mission here today? To break that definition wide open, right? See how Scanlon's take on this whole contractualism thing, how it's different from other ideas about morality, right? And then, of course, we got to dig into those implications, the exciting parts, and probably a few headaches along the way, I'm guessing.
Absolutely. Headaches guaranteed. But first, let's lay the foundation right. What is contractualism in this very specific Scanlonian sense? And the thing is, it's more than just labeling stuff as right or wrong. It's about the whole nature of reasons. Like, what makes a reason good enough to justify something morally? It's about the process of moral thinking itself. It's not just the answers, but how we arrive at them.
So not a moral to-do list, but like the instruction manual for how that list even gets made.
Perfect analogy. And Scanlon, he's really big on this idea of mutual recognition. And this isn't some fluffy extra. It's like the core value that gives morality its oomph. Because morality is about relating to other people in a way they can get on board with as rational beings. So this mutual recognition is the heart of what makes being moral actually good, according to Scanlon.
Okay, so hang on. Let me make sure I'm with you. When Scanlon says an action is wrong, we're not just saying, oh, it's got some badness in it. It's more like the wrongness is the fact that you can't justify it to others. That's kind of mind-bending, isn't it? It's not about finding some moral property out there in the world, but about whether you can justify what you're doing to other people.
Exactly. That's a key insight. The wrongness isn't caused by some bad stuff. The wrongness is this unjustifiability itself. It's a deeper truth about the action. What makes all wrong things wrong under this view is they can't be justified. That's the unifying thread.
And then this is where it gets weird.
Yeah.
The idea that wrong is like the main moral idea and right is just not wrong. We usually think the other way around. We're all about seeking out the good, not just avoiding the bad.
I know, it's a total flip, right? But for Scanlon, putting the focus on wrong means we're zeroing in on what matters most when someone's been wronged. It highlights when those justifiable principles are violated.
It all seems very focused on like how we deal with each other.
Yeah.
How does this tie into that classic idea from Kant about treating people as ends in themselves? Not like tools, but, people worthy of respect.
Great question. And the Stanford entry really makes that connection clear. For Scanlon, to really value someone, you have to acknowledge they can understand stuff and act based on reasons, right? So treating them right means you act according to principles they couldn't reasonably reject. It's like you're acting in a way they'd be okay with if they were thinking it through.
Got it. So it's all about this reasonable rejectability thing?
Hmm.
But now I'm wondering, how is this different from all the other social contract theories out there? I mean, that's a pretty big philosophical tradition, right?
You're right, social contract gets thrown around a lot. But here's a key difference. Think of contractarianism. That's Hobbes and later Gauthier. For them, it's all about self-interest. We agree to rules because it benefits us in the long run. It's kind of a what's in it for me view of morality, but in a smart way.
So it's like enlightened self-interest. Morality is a good deal for everyone.
Exactly. But Scanlon's contractualism, totally different starting point. It's about equal moral status for everyone from the get-go. And that's based on our ability to be rational and make our own choices. So it's not about me maximizing my stuff through some bargain. It's about how I pursue my stuff in a way I can justify to others who also have their own stuff going on.
That's a huge distinction. It's not transactional. It's like
Yeah.
divile respect-based.
Okay.
Okay, but what about Kant himself? You said there's overlap with contractualism, but they're not the same, right?
Right. Kant, he was all about finding principles that all rational beings would agree to if they were being, like, perfectly rational. So often he's thinking in very abstract terms, leaving out a lot of the nitty-gritty of our lives. Now, contractualism takes inspiration from that focus on reason, but it offers something a bit more down to earth. It's focused on what no one could reasonably reject, you see. And that's a subtle but important difference. Reasonable rejection takes into account more of the context, the specifics of our lives.
So Kant is like pure reason, universal principles. Scanlon is more about surviving the scrutiny of a bunch of different viewpoints. Okay, one more big name, John Rawls.
Rawls is crucial, especially if you're into political philosophy. His veil of ignorance idea, it's all about finding the rules for a fair society, he asks. What would we agree to if we didn't know who we'd be in that society? Like our social status, our talents, all that. So the veil forces us to think about everyone's interests.
So Rawls is about political justice, and he uses this thought experiment where we're all ignorant of our own place in society.
Precisely. But for Scanlon, no veil of ignorance. You know your situation, your values, the whole deal. The reason you care about justifying your actions to others isn't because you might be them someday, but because, well, you just want to be able to justify your actions. It's like a built-in desire to be able to say, here's why this is okay.
Cool. Okay, so we've seen how Scanlon's view is different from other social contract folks. Now, the Stanford entry also makes a big deal about how it's not utilitarianism.
Yeah.
That's all about maximizing happiness, right? The greatest good for the greatest number.
That's utilitarianism in a nutshell. It's all about well-being and making choices that lead to the best overall outcome, happiness-wise, for the most people. Very consequentialist, the ends justify the means, kind of.
And Stanford points out three big differences with contractualism, right?
Yeah.
Starting with, like, how broad each theory is, their scope.
Right. Utilitarianism, it wants to explain all of morality, from how we act personally to big political decisions. But Scanlon's contractualism is more focused. It's about what we owe to each other. He's even said this might not cover every single moral thing out there.
So contractualism is a more defined area. What were the other two big differences? One was about aggregation. That's a
Yeah.
big one,
Yeah.
right? Because utilitarianism is all about adding up everyone's happiness.
It's the big one. Contractualism says nope to just adding up well-being or suffering like that. It stays focused on each person's individual viewpoint. So when we're deciding if a rule is acceptable, we look at each person's reasons for objecting to it, one by one. This prevents a situation where, like, a million minor complaints outweigh one person's really serious issue.
It's about respecting that each person is separate, not just a number in a happiness calculation.
Yeah.
That's super different from utilitarianism's whole method.
Absolutely. Utilitarianism often has to, add and subtract to find the best overall result. But contractualism starts with each person's individual reason for saying no to something. And those reasons can take into account, the specifics of people's lives in a way that just adding up happiness units can't.
So my objection to a rule isn't just about whether it makes me personally unhappy, but whether it gives me a reason to object, especially compared to how other rules would affect other people.
Right. If a rule is tough on me, but all the other options would be even worse for someone else, then me being a little unhappy isn't a good enough reason to reject it, A reasonable person, Scanlon says, would back down if they realize someone else has a more serious objection to the alternatives.
And the third difference I remember was that contractualism doesn't just look at happiness and suffering. You can have other reasons for objecting to something.
You got it. My reason for saying no to a rule isn't limited to how it affects my own happiness or pain. It can also be about, like, how the rule burdens me and what that says about my status as a person. Imagine a rule that's racist versus a rule that's just random but burdens you the same amount. You'd reject the racist one not just because it's tough on you, but because it treats you as less than in a way that's not okay.
So it's not just about the outcome, the overall balance of good and bad. It's about the principles behind the rules. This seems like it avoids some of those tricky situations with utilitarianism, where the best outcome feels super unfair.
Exactly. Contractualist reasons are more flexible than just adding up good and bad. We can directly talk about fairness, respecting people's choices, and the idea that everyone has worth. We don't have to go through this whole calculation of utility points. It explains better why some things are wrong in a way that feels right to us.
All right, switching gears a bit. The Stanford entry gets into how Scanlon's view is different from other theories that aren't consequentialist. And a big one here is, like, intention. Doesn't matter what you're trying to do, not just the outcome. That's a huge debate in ethics, right?
It's a classic. Lots of non-consequentialist theories say your intentions are really important when judging if an action is moral. Think of the doctrine of double effect. That's the idea that some actions, they might be okay if the bad outcome is like a side effect, but not okay if that bad outcome is what you're aiming for. The example they use is giving someone drugs to ease pain, but knowing it might also like speed up their death, or bombing a military target knowing civilians might get hurt.
Right, so it's okay to cause harm if you didn't mean to, but not if it was your goal, even if it leads to something good overall. It's all about what you were thinking when you did it.
Exactly. But Scanlon, he's like, hold on, intentions aren't the deciding factor here. He gets that intentions can tell us what someone might do in the future, and they matter for judging a person's character, for sure. But whether an action is allowed or not, he says it's not about what's in your head, it's about the reasons that count against the action itself. Reasons anyone could see, regardless of your intention.
And he uses those trolley problems to make that point, right? Like the one where the trolley loops back around to the single person on the track, or the doctor who gives a drug that shortens life but eases suffering.
Yeah, those examples really push on this idea of intention. In the loop case, the outcome's the same as the regular trolley problem, but the way it happens is different. But we still think switching the trolley is okay, even though it directly leads to one person dying. And with the doctor, even if they had some selfish reason for giving the drug, it doesn't seem to change whether it was okay to ease the patient's suffering. Scanlon's point is, what makes something wrong are the reasons against doing it, not what the person was thinking at the time.
So let's say a doctor is refusing to treat a patient so they can take their organs. For a contractualist, it's not really about whether the doctor wanted the organs. It's about whether a rule that lets doctors do that could be justified to patients.
Exactly. The intention comes up in judging the person, because what they intended to do, kill the patient for their organs, that's wrong based on these basic contractualist ideas about how we should treat each other.
So it's all about the action itself, not what's going on in someone's head. Now, the Stanford entry moves on to blame and responsibility, which seems like another place where intentions matter a lot.
Oh, totally. And Scanlon's super careful about this. He separates moral reaction and responsibility. That's like, is it okay to be mad at someone or to praise them, from substantive responsibility? That's about how your past actions change what you're obligated to do now. Contractualism is mostly about the first kind, how we react to each other. And it says we're justified in blaming someone when their action shows an attitude that would damage our relationship with them.
So it's not just about saying someone did something bad. It's about what their actions tell us about them and how that affects trust and being able to rely on each other.
Right on. Blaming someone means two things. You decide they deserve blame, and you change how you act towards them because of it. Maybe you trust them less, or you're less willing to do favors, or you tell them you're not cool with it. The example in the entry is about a friend who laughs at mean jokes about you. It shows they don't care about your feelings, and that hurts the friendship, so blame is a natural reaction.
Makes sense. But what about blaming strangers? We don't have a personal relationship with them, but it still feels okay to blame them if they wrong us.
Scanlon says we actually do have a moral relationship with all people. Just by being rational beings, capable of understanding and justifying ourselves to each other, we're in a moral relationship. And that means there are basic expectations for how we treat each other, even if we don't know each other. So when someone acts in a way that shows they don't care about those expectations, we can blame them, even if they're a stranger.
It's like a baseline level of decency we owe each other. And blame is what happens when that's broken. How is this different from, like, retributivism? That's the idea that punishment is about making someone pay for doing wrong.
Good question. Contractualism says doing something wrong doesn't totally destroy the moral relationship we have. Even a jerk still deserves basic moral respect. Blame is more like putting some things on hold in that relationship. You might trust them less, help them less, not be as close. It's not about kicking them out of the moral club or making them suffer. Plus, this view of blame avoids those debates about free will. It's about reacting to someone's actual attitudes no matter what caused them.
Interesting. Now, the Stanford entry mentions this thing called the convergence argument. And it sounds like it's saying that maybe contractualism isn't so different from other big moral theories after all.
Yeah, that's a real head-scratcher. Derek Parfit, in his book on What Matters, he argues that rule consequentialism, Scanlon's contractualism, and the best version of Kant's ethics, they actually all lead to the same conclusions. So, an action is wrong only if it goes against rules that are best for everyone overall and are the only rules everyone could reasonably agree to, and are rules no one could reasonably reject.
Wait, so he's saying all these different theories are basically the same deep down. That's a good claim, especially since contractualism is usually seen as an alternative to consequentialism and Kant's ethics.
Right. It's a bold move. And his argument hinges on what he thinks is the best version of contractualism. He says we should get rid of two things that Scanlon calls the individualist restriction and the impersonal restriction.
So those are like rules about what kinds of objections are allowed.
Exactly. The individualist one says you can only object to a rule based on how it affects you and other individuals, not how it affects, like, the world as a whole. And the impersonal one says you can't reject a rule just because the overall outcome is good or bad. You have to focus on how it treats individuals. Parfit says getting rid of these makes contractualism more complete and lines it up with his takes on Kant and rule consequentialism.
So he's saying that if a rule is the only one everyone could reasonably accept, then no one individual's objection can be stronger than all the objections to every other rule. And following that rule would also lead to the best results for everyone.
That's the convergence argument in a nutshell. But as Stanford points out, there are lots of counterexamples, especially when you have to choose between preventing a huge harm to one person and giving smaller benefits to lots of people. Convergence folks often say the one person can't reasonably reject the best rule in those cases, but it depends on how you understand reasonable rejection.
It sounds like there's real debate about whether Parfit is actually capturing what Scanlon meant, or if he's kind of forcing it to be more like consequentialism. People who like contractualism because it's not utilitarian might not be on board with this whole convergence thing.
For sure. It's a thought-provoking argument, but it doesn't prove that all these theories are the same at their core. Maybe it just shows that if you tweak them enough, they can avoid contradicting each other. And there's a deeper question here about whose intuitions matter when judging these philosophical claims.
All right, so we've looked at how contractualism is different and this idea of convergence. Now, Stanford gets into the criticisms. One is that it might be circular or like redundant. How does that even work?
The circularity worry is like this. Contractualism says what's wrong is whatever no one could reasonably reject. But what if we need to already know what's wrong in order to decide what counts as a reasonable rejection? Like, if we're using our gut feelings about wrongness to figure out what objections are reasonable, then maybe contractualism isn't really giving us a new foundation for morality. Same problem if we swap unfairness for wrongness.
It's like pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
Yeah, right.
If you need to know what's wrong before you can use contractualism, then it's not really telling us anything new.
The comeback to that is usually to focus on how wrongness and justification are connected. Contractualists say we don't figure out what's wrong first and then use that to judge rules. The wrongness comes from thinking about everyone's reasons for rejecting a rule. Because it's wrong isn't the starting point, it's the conclusion. Like with that racist rule, we don't reject it because it's unfair overall, but because it treats people differently based on something irrelevant, and that gives them a reason to object.
So we compare everyone's objections based on how different rules would treat them, and the idea of wrongness comes out of that process. It's more about reasoning together than finding some pre-existing truth about what's wrong.
Exactly. The next big criticism is that contractualism might be too tidy. This is the pluralist challenge. They say morality isn't all about justification.
So, like, some things are just wrong no matter what, like causing pain for no reason. We don't need a big process to figure that out. It's just wrong.
That's the pluralist view. A utilitarian might say torture is wrong because of the suffering, not because of some rule. Pluralists think there are lots of different sources of morality, not just one.
How do contractualists respond to that? If you just feel something is wrong, like causing pain, do they have an answer?
Usually they focus on the fact that in cases like torture, the suffering is caused on purpose by another person. That's different from getting hurt in an accident. It's about agency. And they say contractualism can explain that. They also point out that it's about what anyone could reasonably reject, not just what someone actually does reject at a given time. So even if no one says they object to causing pointless pain, it's the kind of thing they would always have a good reason to reject.
So they're saying the reason it's wrong is built into the situation, even if no one's actually complaining at that moment.
Right. It's about how different theories interpret our moral intuitions. Now, another big challenge is this question of aggregation again. Can contractualism really avoid adding things up, especially when numbers seem to matter?
This is where those thought experiments come in, right? Like saving one person or 5 people from drowning. Most of us would save the 5, but contractualism isn't supposed to just count up how many people are affected.
Exactly. In that rock scenario, each person has a good reason to reject a rule that lets them drown. And the five can't just combine their objections into one mega objection. So what happens? Some contractualists say maybe the best rule is to flip a coin, since that gives everyone an equal chance.
But that seems kind of cold, right? Aren't there other ways to justify saving the five without just adding up their interests like a utilitarian?
There are definitely attempts. Some say a rule that treats saving five as the same as saving one doesn't respect each individual life enough. It's not that the claims of the five become less important when there's only one person on the other side, they all still matter. But then you have cases where the burdens are really unequal, like one person suffers a lot for a long time versus a million people suffer a little bit.
That seems impossible to solve without considering the total amount of suffering, right? It pushes against that individual focus. And I remember Parfit criticizes the individualist restriction for this exact reason.
Yeah, he's got all these examples where focusing only on individual objections leads to weird results. He thinks sometimes you have to consider the overall impact on everyone. So contractualists who want to keep that individual focus have to either come up with different explanations or accept some outcomes that seem morally wrong.
Which brings us to the next problem. How demanding is contractualism? Like, what does it actually require us to do, especially in a world with so much suffering?
This is the demandingness objection. If we have to act in ways no one could reasonably reject, and poor people could reasonably reject rules that let us hoard resources, then maybe contractualism is telling us to give up almost everything to help others.
So it's like utilitarianism, where you have
Yes.
to give until it hurts. The entry talks about Scanlon's rescue principle, which says we have to help people in danger if it doesn't cost us too much. But there might be even stronger principles, ones that demand huge sacrifices.
Yep. Some say that's just what happens when you take everyone's moral worth seriously. But others worry that being that moral is just impossible in practice. So, how do we justify pursuing our own goals, even if it means others suffer more? One answer is to say rules that are too demanding could themselves be rejected because they don't let us have any kind of life for ourselves.
It's finding that balance between helping those in need and not crushing people with moral burdens. This connects to substantive responsibility, right? When is it your fault that you're in a bad situation and others don't have to help?
That's exactly it. It's about when your own choices mean you have to deal with the consequences and others aren't obligated to step in. They use that example about hazardous waste removal.
Oh, yeah, where the city tells people to stay inside, but this guy, curious, goes outside anyway and gets hurt.
Right. One view is that he broke the rules, so he forfeited his right to be protected. But Scanlon prefers the value of choice view. It says it's important that our lives are affected by our choices, even bad ones. We need to be able to choose, even if we choose wrong. But then there's that twist where Curious is known for being reckless. If they secretly kept him safe, wouldn't that be better for him, even if it disrespects his choice? That's the challenge, right? Critics say that when someone's constantly making bad choices, maybe it is better to protect them, even if they're not fully in control. But contractualists often say there are bigger reasons to respect choices. Like it's good for society overall to have clear rules and let people be in charge of their own lives. They also say to think about what an average person in that society would want, and usually that includes some control over their own risks.
Thinking about what an average person wants seems important for the whole risk thing in general. So much of what we do puts others at risk, even if it's unintentional.
Totally. Driving is the perfect example. It lets us get around, it's good for the economy, but it also causes accidents, some fatal. Utilitarians can say the benefits outweigh the costs, but how does contractualism deal with that if each person can object to being put at risk?
The entry talks about judging risk beforehand, ex ante, based on what you know about the dangers, versus judging it afterward, ex post, based on what actually happened. So, do we judge driving based on the small chance of an accident or based on the fact that some people do die because of it?
Contractualism usually goes with the ex ante view. The idea is when we're deciding if driving is okay, we weigh the risks of accidents against the benefits of having cars. And from that perspective, if there are good safety rules, no one could reasonably say no to driving, even though we know some people will get hurt. But then there's that example with the Amish farmer who doesn't drive. He still has to deal with the risks of planes flying overhead, but he doesn't get the benefits.
It's like, is it fair to make him bear that risk if he doesn't get anything out of it?
That's the tough part. The usual contractualist response is to say he benefits from living in a society that values freedom, even if that means some people face risks they don't choose. But those ambulance examples make it even trickier. Maybe we do need to consider what happens after the fact, not just the risks beforehand. And then there's the unexploded mind scenario, where some people know way more about the risks than others.
So figuring out how to deal with risk is a whole other can of worms for contractualism. And finally, there's the question of who's even included in all this moral stuff. What about animals and future generations? Social contract theories have a hard time with those, right?
Yeah, it's a classic problem. If morality is about agreement between people, what about those who can't agree? Utilitarianism can include animals because they can suffer. Scanlon initially said contractualism is just about what we owe to other people, but later he suggested maybe there could be human trustees to represent animal interests.
But that seems like a workaround, right? Animal rights folks would say the wrongness of hurting an animal is about the animal's experience, not about our rules.
Contractualists might say their theory is focused on a specific kind of wrong, the kind where you can't justify your actions to someone else who can reason. They'd say the animal case shows what's unique about their view. Maybe there are other moral obligations, but contractualism is about the kind we have to beings who can reason with us.
What about future people? They can't be part of any agreement now.
This is actually where contractualism might be better than other social contract views, because it's about whether someone could reasonably reject a rule, not whether they actually do. So even though future people don't exist yet, we can still ask if they'd have a reason to reject the rules we're following now, rules that will affect them.
Like, if we leave behind nuclear waste, they could object to that even though they aren't here to say it right now.
Yeah.
That's pretty good for dealing with future generations.
It is. But then there's the non-identity problem. Parfit has that example where a woman has to decide when to have a kid. If she has it now, it'll have a health problem. If she waits, it'll be healthy. The kid born with the problem might object, but if she waited, it would be a different kid. So who was wronged?
It's like, you can't complain about being harmed if you wouldn't even exist without that choice being made.
Right. So some contractualists say it's about respecting your future child, whoever that turns out to be. And Parfit suggests adding impartial reasons into contractualism to deal with these cases. Plus, there are those really big risks, like human extinction. If we destroy ourselves, there won't be any future people to object.
So many layers to this. To wrap things up, Scanlon's contractualism gives us a framework for morality based on this idea that good rules are ones no reasonable person could reject.
And its strengths are that focus on justification, its ability to include reasons beyond just happiness and suffering, and the way it tackles those tough moral dilemmas.
But it definitely has challenges too. All these questions about adding up harms, how much we have to sacrifice, animals, future people, risk.
But those are what keeps it interesting. They show it's a living, evolving theory, and it gives us a different perspective on morality beyond just following rules or making everyone happy.
So, next time you're in a disagreement about what's right or wrong, try thinking about what principle is behind each side's argument. Could either of you reasonably reject that principle? It might change how you see the whole thing. And if you're really into this, definitely check out that Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry. It's got a ton of info and links to all the works we talk about.